guys. Here we go. This is our discussion or information on what comes after the English Civil War. Remember, in the English Civil War, the English Civil War is all about political power and the political power of a king and how much power a king has. King Charles I said, "I've been put here by God. Divine right says I have absolute power." Parliament, the legislature that was created by the Magna Carta, says, no, you don't have absolute power. Your power is subject to the power of the legislature. Specifically, you cannot tax without our consent. And they go to war over it, and in the end, the parliamentary forces called the Roundheads defeated Charles' army, who was called the Cavaliers. And Charles ends up, everybody thinks Charles is going to go back to being king with some limitations. He will not agree to those limitations. So they put him on trial, and in 1649 they execute him, which shocked the world that you would execute a king. But now we got a problem. What are we going to do? How are we going to rule ourselves? We don't have a king anymore. So what do? Right away, Parliament passes a law, and they ban or abolish the monarchy. And Parliament runs things, but they got to have somebody in charge. Remember, Parliament is the legislature. The legislatures make laws. So Parliament to Britain is like Congress is in the United States. They create a republic. Remember the Roman Republic. In the Roman Republic, the Senate was in charge. Well, the Roman Senate always had a consul, who was two of them actually, who were always in charge of day-to-day running the government. Well, Parliament appoints a guy named Oliver Cromwell, and they give him the title of Lord Protector, and he becomes the executive for the government. And he is in charge from 1653 to 1658. Now, some of the problems they're facing, Parliament continues to have problems. There are still people around who support Charles I. They're called royalists, and periodically they will rebel. There's a problem in Ireland because the Irish are primarily Catholic, and they resist. They see an opportunity to try and overthrow rule by Britain. So Parliament sends Cromwell over, and he viciously puts down the rebellion. There's one place called Drogheda where he just destroys an entire town and kills everyone in it. Not just the soldiers, the men, the women, the children, the old people, and then they just flatten. And he dispossesses the Irish Catholics, forces them to move into the western side of the island of Ireland, which is not as productive, and he takes a bunch of Scottish Protestants from Scotland and he moves them into the 6 counties on the eastern side of the island, which coincidentally are the best agricultural land. And that's going to create problems that are going to come all the way down to the 20th century. But he brings order, he being Cromwell, brings order back, and they are running things fairly efficiently. But they impose kind of a theocracy, not unlike Geneva. They make a bunch of rules that they think are consistent with the Puritan belief system. So they do away with taverns, they do away with theaters, they do away with dancing. They ban the celebration of Christmas because they think if you celebrate Christmas, if you're partying on Christmas, you're really not honoring the birth of Jesus the right way. They also do some good things, like there's this one form of popular entertainment called bear baiting, where you just put a bear down in a pit and you throw dogs in there to fight the bears, and people would bet on that. So they did away with that. They established a good education system. They made sure kids could read and write. Why? So they can read the Bible. They were very much pro-family. Their laws encourage marriage out of the sake of love. So there's kind of a mixed bag on Oliver Cromwell. Some people, he's a very controversial figure. Some think he's a dictator. Some of them, looking back, say, oh no, he's a great guy for Britain. Um, he dies in 1658. Now we've got a problem. Who's going to take over? Well, his son Richard runs the government for a while, but he's not very good at running things. So what do? Parliament goes to France and they invite Charles II, the son of Charles I, to come back and be king. You can imagine that. Wait a minute, guys. You executed my father. Now you want me back? But eventually he comes back. And when he does, he agrees. We call this period, so we've had the English Civil War. When we bring the monarchy back in Charles II, this is referred to as the Restoration. And Charles II is a pretty good ruler. One of the bizarre things he does is they put Oliver Cromwell on trial. Oliver Cromwell's been dead for 3 years. They put him on trial and they dig up his body and they execute him. And then they burn his bones, cut off his head and take it somewhere. Okay? But Charles II is now in charge. Now, he is basically a Catholic, but he restores the power of the Anglican Church. They have theaters come back. They have holidays come back. Taverns are back. Dancing is okay. Everybody loves Charles II because he restores life to the way it was before the English Civil War, or the Commonwealth, the government that was established by the Puritans. He's also a hero because in 1666 there's a big fire in London, and he and his brother go out and they're on the front lines of fighting the fire. They are grabbing buckets, they are throwing water. He encourages the growth of science. He encourages the growth of architecture in the areas of London that were destroyed by the fire. He has a bunch of building done, and especially designed by a guy named Christopher Wren. He dies, Charles II dies in 1685. He has about 12 kids at the time. The problem is none of them are the children of his wife. He has a whole bunch of mistresses and a whole bunch of kids, but there is no legitimate successor, no heir to the crown. So what happens? They appoint his brother James. He's the next in line to the throne. James does a lot of silly things. Charles II agreed to the Petition of Right. James II is an open Catholic. He's openly practicing Catholicism, and he appoints a bunch of Catholic representatives and officials in office. He suspends laws that are passed by Parliament without their consent, and pretty soon people in Parliament begin to get really scared of him. So what do? They go and they invite his daughter, Mary. Mary is married to a guy named William of Orange. He's Dutch. And they invite them to come and be the king and queen. So William gets an army of 25,000 guys together. They invade. And when they do, James flees and goes back to France, mostly because most of the officers who were serving in James's army quit and go over to William's army. So he's got nobody to lead his army. So he flees. So William and Mary are placed on the throne. This is referred to as the Glorious Revolution because there is no bloodshed. Okay? Now, William and Mary are installed. They agree to the Petition of Right, and they also agree to another piece of legislature that's passed in 1688. It's called the English Bill of Rights. It establishes a number of very specific rights that didn't previously exist. For one thing, a king has to regularly call Parliament in. You can't leave them out there for 11 years like Charles I did. You have to come in. They establish that you have freedom of speech in Parliament. It's not for everybody in Parliament, but it's a start on the way to what we recognize as freedom of speech today, especially political speech. As part of the English Bill of Rights, Protestants are given the right to bear arms, much like our Second Amendment. They were scared that the Catholics might take control. So Protestants are specifically given the right to bear arms. It's stated specifically that no Catholic will serve as king. This is going to be a big problem later on in the 1930s. An English guy who's about to be the king abdicates his throne because he's in love with an American woman who's a Catholic, and he wants to marry her, but if he's a Catholic, he can't be king. The other big thing that the English Bill of Rights does is it extends the rights of the Magna Carta to all citizens. Remember, the Magna Carta only applied to nobles. Now, the right to a trial by jury, the right to habeas corpus, protection from cruel and unusual punishments, protection from excessive fines, the right to be tried in your own county. All of those things apply across the board to all citizens. Then and that's really important. That's called the English Bill of Rights. And it's important because it's going to become the basis for our Bill of Rights in our Constitution. In 1689, they passed something called the Toleration Act, which gives limited religious freedom to people like Quakers and Puritans. That's going to become a basis for our First Amendment. So in the end, after the Restoration, after the Glorious Revolution, what Britain ends up with is something called a limited monarchy, in which the power of a monarch is limited by a constitution or a legislature. Now, Britain doesn't have a single constitution. When Britain talks about a constitution, they mean several different documents like the Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights, all taken as one. So, but it's very important because now we've come full circle. The power of a king is limited, and it's limited in part by the legislation of the legislative body, in this case Parliament, but it's also limited specifically by the rights of the citizens. Kings are not allowed to violate the rights of the citizens. So what we see happening in Britain is limitation on the power of kings. And that becomes very important because that's going to lead up to the American Revolution later on. Okay? So I've got a little assignment quiz for you. I got a fun little video to watch about Charles II. We started out with review on Cromwell at the beginning, so knock this stuff out. I'll talk to you later.